Hey, it's Hazem. One thing I always keep in my car as a technician is a stash of AC power adapters. Now, what kind of AC power adapters do you need and why do you need them? Well, first of all, you always have equipment with AC DC power and it's always susceptible to failure. And when it fails, you really need a new one. And it's like, where do I got one from and what happens? And so, the one I like to get, you can get these off Amazon for like 20 bucks. And they got a whole bunch of tips. So they come with all the different size tips, and they also come with a terminal block, so you can even hardwire directly to whatever you have. So if you don't have the tip, you can actually cut off the existing tip and wire it to the positive and negative terminals on this terminal block. And so the adapter itself, if you're in Canada or the United States, you have the two-pronged outlet, and basically it has a standard sized tip, and you can just add, you can take off whichever tip you want, for example, and then I will just wrap this with electrical tape. But this just fits on the end here. It's hard to do with one hand, but we're just gonna. So it just fits onto the end here, and now you've got power, and you can power up anything you need. Now, when you want to buy, most equipment is either 12 volts or 24 volts. Occasionally you get battery chargers that are 14 volts, and the reason they're 14 volts is because a 12 volt battery needs a little bit of an extra kick to charge, to overcome the resistance in the battery. So they're rated for 14 volts. Now you want to get something. So when you look at the AC adapter, your input, you want to get something that's 120 volt input. So this one does 100 to 240 volts, so it doesn't really matter what your power source is. 120 is in there, and obviously 50, 60 hertz. And this always outputs 12 volt DC, 2 amps. Doesn't matter what's coming in, it'll output 2 amps. And you want something that will output a high enough amperage. So if you look at your equipment, if your equipment, say, here's where you gotta be careful. If you don't want to go with a voltage that's too high. So if your equipment is 5 volts and you give it 12 volts, you'll cook it. And if it's 24 volts and if it's 24, if you give it a voltage that's too high, you'll cook it. So most equipment's either 12 or 24 or sometimes 48. So you might want to have a bunch of these that are 12s and a bunch of these that are 24 volts. Now, if your equipment amperage is lower than what this thing outputs, that's okay, because this thing is not going to shove more amps into your equipment than what your equipment needs. So you want to pick something with a pretty high amperage, because at the end of the day, your equipment's only going to use the amps that it needs. It's not going to a higher amperage isn't going to cook your equipment, but a higher voltage will. So you gotta be careful there. And you also don't want to go too low of a voltage, because if you do, then your equipment will not function properly. So what I recommend is to check. Some equipment will have a range of input voltages, so it might be 12, or it might say like 10 to 14 volts, in which case this is totally fine. There's really nothing else that you need to know about these. They're pretty generic power adapters, and you can get them off Amazon, but it's always great to have a few. And sometimes maybe you want to get some 12s, some 24s, and you want to get them around the 2 amp output range, and you want to get some bigger ones if you're trying to charge laptops and things like that. It might need like 15 or 20 amps. If you have any questions, please post a comment. Thank you.